It's the most wonderful time of the year. Excitement and anticipation is building. Decorations are up, houses are lit up with Christmas lights, presents are being bought and wrapped, and we're getting ready to go out to Christmas parties and to carol services. And this year, we're looking forward to celebrating with family and friends after a year of Christmas in isolation. A big part of the joy and the celebration of Christmas is the people we get to spend it with. It's that connection that makes this a wonderful time of year. But the people we do Christmas with are also part of the reason why the most wonderful time of the year is also the most stressful. Organisations like Relate, who help people through relational difficulties, see an increase in calls as a result of family tension that's happened over the Christmas period. We want this perfect Christmas experience, but we forget that the people we're spending it with, like ourselves, are not perfect. So that dream is impossible. It leaves us feeling disappointed. We get disappointed by the kids arguing with each other. We get annoyed with overbearing or overly demanding guests. We get irritated by family members who overstay their welcome or who don't bother to show their face at all. We get stressed by trying to get everything ready for a wonderful Christmas dinner, only for Grandad to knock over the gravy, Uncle Steve to complain about having to eat sprouts, and Aunt Nellie to drink a bit too much Prosecco and step over the mark, offending every person in the world with one throwaway comment. It really is the most wonderful time of the year. So, how can we find peace this Christmas in the midst of all these relational dynamics? Well, let's take a look at a line from a song that King David wrote. You can find it in Psalm 34. Now, David has had his fair share of conflict in his life. This psalm is a reflection of just one in a myriad of occasions where David's life was threatened. David became famous for killing the Philistine giant Goliath. Now, Saul was the king of Israel at the time, and he gave David his daughter in marriage as a reward. And David's fame grew, and Saul became jealous of him, so he tried to kill him. Sounds like a normal family Christmas to me. You can read all about it in 1 Samuel, and they should do a soap opera on it. It makes any EastEnders storyline look tame in comparison. So one day, David is fleeing from Saul and his armies, and he goes to Gath. Now that's a city in Israel that was under Philistine rule. The people recognized him and brought him before the king. And he wasn't sure what King Achish would do, so David pretends to be insane. And his plan works. They leave him alone, and David escapes. Now, this experience is nothing like our experiences. Although I have heard a few people say they like to kill their in-laws and that their families drive them insane, especially at Christmas. But anyway, David goes from one difficult situation to another. He avoids being killed by one person only to find himself being threatened by someone else. Yet he escapes both. And he's thankful to God. And that's his motivation behind this psalm. That's why he says, the righteous person faces many troubles, but the Lord comes to the rescue each time. For the Lord protects the bones of the righteous. Not one of them is broken. Now that's David's experience. He knows what it's like to face hardship and conflict, and his experience is that God comes through for him each time. Why? What is David's secret? How does he find peace in the midst of this extreme conflict when we struggle to find peace in our family arguments? Well, part of the answer is linked into David's attitude and the things he tries to do. Look at these words from earlier on in this psalm. Come, my children, and listen to me, and I will teach you to fear the Lord. Does anyone want to live a life that is long and prosperous? Then keep your tongue from speaking evil and your lips from telling lies. Turn away from evil and do good. Search for peace and work to maintain it. Let's take these words and apply them to our context. Now, we're not trying to avoid being executed by the king, but we are trying to discover peace in our families. We're hoping for a joyful and a prosperous Christmas. A Christmas that's full of what Christmas should be full of, instead of one that's full of arguments, grudges, and disagreements. David's advice to us is to keep our tongues from speaking evil and our lips from telling lies. Now, we looked at this in a previous series called One Another. That was all about holding in words that are harmful and destructive and pushing out words that are helpful, that benefit those who hear them. I think a lot of the stress and difficulties that come as a result of spending time with family and friends at Christmas would be lifted if we all were careful about what we said. What a difference it would make if we all held in those words that we knew would be harmful and offend, and instead we chose to push out words that were encouraging and life giving, words that lifted and built each other up. Being careful with what we say is part of David's secret to a long and prosperous life, and I think it's part of the secret behind a happy and a peaceful Christmas. David also tells us to turn away from evil and to do good. Now, our temptation when someone does something to us that causes pain is to do the same back to them. We repay evil with evil, we repay hurt with hurt. And this links into the previous point. So many Christmas conflicts are caused by a careless word or a throwaway comment that someone makes. It causes pain or offense, and so we retaliate. We say something else back with the intent of causing pain, and it spirals out of control. David's advice is to turn away from evil and do good. Now, about 1,000 years after David wrote these words, a guy called Paul wrote a letter to the church in Rome. Now, we've got a copy of this letter in the New Testament section of our Bibles. Paul says, "Don't repay evil with evil, but repay evil with good." In our context, this is about not retaliating. It's about not hitting back. It's about giving up the right to get even. Instead, take a breath, a deep breath. Count to 10 or 10,000 if you need to. Now, that's difficult enough to do. It takes so much willpower to not react or retaliate, but that's not the end of the challenge. The next step is to actively seek good, to repay evil with good. Part of David's secret to a long and prosperous life, and for us to have a happy and peaceful Christmas, is for us to choose to do good when people do things that hurt or irritate us. Instead of going out of our way to get even, we're called to go out of our way to bless them. Now, David goes on to say to us, search for peace and work to maintain it. This is so countercultural. It was then, and it is now. When it comes to peace, most of us want it. We welcome it, but we don't search for it. We don't work to maintain it. We wait for it. When it comes to peace, we often wait for them to make the first move, especially when they were the one who said or did something that caused conflict in the first place. The ball's in their court. It's up to them to make the first move. Now, it's completely understandable that we think and feel like this, but it rarely results in peace. Chances are they're thinking the same thing. They are waiting for you to make the first move because in their eyes, the pain and conflict was caused by you. We all know that conflict and fallout is rarely a result of one thing that one person did. There's always two sides to every story. David's challenge to us is to search for peace and work to maintain it. He's encouraging us to be people who pursue peace, to go out of our way to find it and maintain it. But how do we do this? Well, I wish I could give you a foolproof formula to follow. 3 simple steps to ensure you have peace in your relationships this Christmas. But we all know it's not as simple as that. But that doesn't mean that there aren't things that we can do to find peace. The things that David has already said about being careful with what we say and choosing to do good plays a big part in this. But let me give you 2 more. 2 attitudes that you can adopt that will help you find peace in your relationships this Christmas. Firstly, focus on you. What's dependent on you? Do that. We can easily fall into the trap of worrying about what other people do or don't do that we forget to focus on what we can or should do. When it comes to pursuing peace, do what you can do, whether they do it or not. Now, most of us struggle to do this because we think it's not fair. Why should I work to maintain peace if they don't? Well, part of the answer to that question is the Christian word grace. We'll come back to that in just a moment. The other reason we do this is because peace doesn't just happen by itself. It happens because one party focuses on what they can do rather than just responding to what the other side is doing. We focus on ourselves. We do what we can do, what is dependent on us. And that leads us on to the second thing. Make the first move. To be people who pursue peace, we need to be willing to make the first move rather than waiting for them to come to us. If I had a mince pie for every time I heard someone say something like, I will apologize when they apologize first, well, I'd have at least 3 mince pies, maybe more. A gap is created when there is conflict. A divide appears when the peace has been broken or when pain or offense has been caused. Left by itself, this gap just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and we throw things into it which pushes us further and further apart. We throw the pain and the offense we've been caused into it. We throw the annoyance and the irritation into it, and we throw things like suspicion and negativity into it. We tell ourselves things like, they did that because they don't care. Or they're always saying things like that, and they shouldn't because it's not kind or it's not fair. But who are we saying those things to? Well, it's to someone else. We say or think these things because we want to justify our feelings of pain and hurt. We want to show that we're in the right and they're in the wrong. And the best way we can do that is to find someone who agrees with us. But the gap just gets bigger and bigger. The divide increases the more we throw things into it. The alternative is to bridge the gap by making the first move. The sooner we do this, the easier it is. This is so much more difficult when we allow time to pass and the gap to increase. When somebody does something that causes pain or offense, we're challenged to do what we can to seek and maintain peace. That means going to them and not to somebody else. It means talking about it with them and not with someone else. We need to remember the bit about being careful with our words here. We don't go to them with the intention of showing them why they are wrong and why we're right. Instead, we go to them with the intention of bridging the gap that's appeared. We go with the intention of reconciliation. And part of this is a willingness to share why that word or that action has caused pain or offense. Go with trust, assuming their intention wasn't to wound, and gently show them how it's impacted you. Now, I can't guarantee that this will work all of the time. What happens next is dependent on them. It's beyond your control. But if you make the first move, if you take the initiative, and if you do so with a genuine desire to help, with a genuine desire to close the gap, well, you've done what's dependent on you, and that's all you can do. Now, I know this sounds like hard work, and that's because it is. We're expecting David's secret to live a long and prosperous life to be easy. But there's another reason behind why we should give this a go. There's another reason why we should work hard to find peace this Christmas. And for me, that motivation is found in the meaning behind Christmas. It's discovered in why we're going to these lengths to celebrate with family and friends. See, Christmas is all about Jesus pursuing peace with us. The reason why Jesus came to be born as a baby all those years ago, the reason why the Creator chose to become created, was to close the gap that had grown between us. Jesus didn't repay our evil with evil. Instead, he chose good. Our self-centeredness, our rebellion, our decision to ignore God in the world that he has created causes a divide between us. A great chasm opens up that's filled with our sin. That's a religious word we use to describe the attitude and act of us ignoring God and focusing on ourselves. This chasm was so great, the evil was so strong, that it took an amazing and ultimate act of good, an overwhelming act of love to bridge it. Jesus made the first move. He came to us. He lived among us. And he did what only he could do to close that gap. He gave his life to make it possible for the gap between us to be closed. He did what he could do, even though we carried on doing what we were doing. See, Jesus gave his life for the very people who were taking it. That's not fair, but it is grace. It's a choice to do what we can do, irrespectively of what they do. Jesus made the first move so we can find peace with him. Jesus made the first move to bridge the gap that we caused between us. And then he said, I want you to do the same. You've seen how I have loved you. I want you to love the same. And as a Jesus follower, that's the motivation I need to pursue peace this Christmas. That's the motivation I need to be careful with what I say and choose to do good instead of repaying evil with evil. That's the motivation I need to focus on what I can do and to make the first move. This is exactly what he's done for me, what he's done for us. And he asks, in fact, he commands those of us who believe in him to do the same. The good news is that anything Jesus commands us to do, he helps us to do. Jesus is the source of my motivation to be a person that pursues peace, but He's also the source of my application. I know I can't do this by myself. I can't do things like make the first move, especially when I feel like I'm not the person who caused the conflict. Left to myself, I will most likely go and complain to someone else. I won't have the motivation or inclination to do what I can do to pursue peace. Well, I haven't been left to myself. We haven't been left on our own to get on with it. We haven't been left to follow a bunch of rules and instructions. Those of us who are followers of Jesus have been given the gift of the same Spirit that was at work within Jesus. God's Spirit is at work within us. So let's let Him work in us and through us. Ask for Him to help so you can be a person that pursues peace, and then follow His prompting and guiding. He's commanded you to do this, but He's also equipped you to be able to do it. I hope this Christmas is a time of great joy and celebration. I hope you get to spend it with the people you love, and I hope that it's a time of great peace as you seek to be a person that pursues peace this Christmas.